My lecture today is called Optimizing Trade Through Language Management Strategies. And it's really based upon the work which I've carried out by looking at companies across Europe over several years now, which have led to two reports. One is called Elan and the other is called Pimlico. So I should be referring to those reports. Both of those reports talk about the nature of business in Europe today and how companies can improve their opportunities for trade if they apply language management strategies. So throughout the lecture you'll hear the expression language management strategies, and they'll be defined during the course of the lecture. But let me start by talking about the issue which faces companies today in Europe. First of all, just how serious is the language problem and what does the research tell us? Secondly, what is a language management strategy? Thirdly, how can European companies optimize their trade with access to language strategies? And fourthly, what are the most important references and sources for further information with regard to this particular topic? Let me start by talking about the findings from the Elan study, which was published in 2006, and many of you in the conference may have heard of or read this study. It is a significant study. It looked at 1,960 companies across Europe, and then it also looked at 30 major companies across Europe in order to ascertain what the nature of language management strategies was with regard to trade and improving trade. It came up with a number of findings which were unique and highly innovative, which in a sense measured the impact of language strategies and language knowledge upon companies' export performance in the international global trading environment. And it identified a number of variables which these companies shared in terms of how they applied the use of language management strategies in exporting. As I shall say during the lecture, correlation is not the same as causality. In other words, we can identify certain variables as being critical in the process of export performance, but by adopting those variables, there is no guarantee that a company will improve its trade, but because it is more an association, a best practice model which we have found, rather than a direct guide for companies on how to improve their trade. In the study Elan, we also look more deeply at behavioural patterns, attitudinal patterns and organisational management research in order to identify what the other sectors are which have an impact upon export performance. So what we're saying here is that language management strategies, in other words the application of languages in certain contexts and at certain points in the trading process, are critical but not the only factors which are important for the success of a company. Let me move on then to what the major findings were in this study. We can identify, for example, what the major European languages are which companies need and will need over the next few years. There is a view, of course, and speaking as an Englishman myself, that English is perhaps the most important language in the world. Our findings don't always support this view. What we have found is that English is the predominant language of trade and certainly has now become taken for granted. In other words, companies which wish to trade anywhere in the world will need English in the same way that they will need computer skills. So it's become very much a generic set of skills for companies to obtain. But if you look at the diagram, you'll see there that as we look at the number of languages identified by the companies in the sample, in other words around about 2,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, we can see that other languages are also very important. We can see, for example, the importance of German. So as we move round the pattern here, we see English in blue, German in purple, French in white, and Russian in pale blue. And you can see there that these languages are all going to be very important for small and medium-sized businesses over the next few years if they wish to trade. Now we've identified as well that quite a lot of trade, of course, for European small and medium-sized business is within Europe. which explains the prevalence of European languages. When we come to look at large companies, we see then that their prevalence is for different kinds of global languages. Spanish, for example, is much more important to them. But even so, even for smaller companies, you can see the presence in the diagram of Chinese, Polish, Arabic, Portuguese in particular for Brazil, and other languages, and including Romanian, of course, is present as a language which companies are going to need in order to trade more extensively within Romania and outside of Romania.